This is the follow-up from the middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, bringing more of your voices into the conversation each week. And today we're following up on our latest show where we asked what should change about the Republican Party. And before we get to that, I want to respond to some of you who wrote with criticism of how I handled one of our guests, the Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, Micah Beckwith. Beckwith is a strong Trump supporter. He made a number of claims that you would probably hear from the president and some of his allies, that Democrats are becoming communists, that the United States is not being pushed around anymore by its adversaries, that trans kids are mutilating their bodies. Now, the show, The Middle, is on 500 NPR stations live every week around the country, and I am watching the clock and juggling a couple of guests and trying to figure out, should we go to the next caller? And sometimes I listen back and go, I wish I would have actually corrected that point that that person made. And sometimes I'm like, no, I think it was okay for me to let us just move on from there. I did push back on some of Beckwith's claims, but there were other statements that I probably should have challenged or fact-checked in the moment, and I didn't, and I apologize for that, and I will try to do better next time. At the same time, I want the middle to be a place where people across the political spectrum feel welcome to come and tell us what they actually believe. My job is not to jump in and argue with every single opinion that comes on the show. It's to ask questions, to stick to the facts, to bring different perspectives into the conversation, and to trust that you can listen to all of these various opinions and come to your own conclusions. And I think it's worth remembering it is pretty rare right now on NPR to hear at length from a MAGA Republican like Micah Beckwith. These are people who hold enormous power in our government right now, and they absolutely should be part of the national conversation on the middle. We have to be able to talk to and listen to people we disagree with. Otherwise, our democracy does not work. So with that, thank you for writing in. I do appreciate it. And we're going to hear more of your thoughts about other things from that show this hour as we talk with Chris Cillizza, the great Chris Cillizza, author of the very popular So What Substack. Chris, great to have you here. And thank you for listening through that apology for me.
I was nodding vigorously. I think that as someone who has done a lot of what you do, TV, radio, podcast, whatever, I do think people don't realize that you're juggling a lot of things at once. I think that's something, it's like, okay, we got to get out at this time and we got to make sure this person gets in. So you can't just listen. It's one nice thing about having like a really long conversation. Right. You can an unbound conversation. But the second thing is like, I fight with people fight is the wrong word. I disagree with people often on my YouTube and my Substack because they will say like, I don't know why anyone who interviews Trump doesn't just, when he says the 2020 election was stolen, just as an example, just say, it wasn't, Mr. President. Can you admit that? And refuse to do anything else until and unless Trump admits it. Because the truth is, he's not going to admit it. Now, your job is, as a reporter, in my opinion, as someone interviewing people, your job is to fact check when relevant and important as best as you can, given the logistical challenges, but also to inform the public about how, in particular, the Lieutenant Governor of Indiana or the President of the United States, how they view things. So it is not to simply fixate on one point. I think you make your point and you say the facts don't back that up. Donald Trump is not going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Let me rethink that." But if you spend the entire interview on one point, I think you do a disservice to the public about the wide variety of issues that actually have more relevance to their life than, let's call the 2020 election. So yeah, I have been in your shoes, and I think that, yeah, we all want to do a better job in the moment of thinking on our feet, of not being focused on time cues and getting in and getting out. But that's also the reality of doing what we do.
I also think that there are these news silos that go on right now. And I think people that are, for example, used to watching MS Now all day long, all they ever hear is a never Trump Republican and a Democrat. And they're sort of shocked when they hear somebody saying what Micah Beckwith was saying. But that is something that Donald Trump says all day, Speaker Mike Johnson says all day, and all kinds of senior Republicans say all day long.
And reflects some chunk of the country. I mean, I always remind people, Donald Trump won the popular vote in 2024. He won all 7 swing states. Like, I think you can nitpick and say, well, it was only a plurality of them. No, I mean, it was, if you told me Donald Trump was going to win the popular vote in 2024, I would have been very surprised in October. So it represents a significant chunk of the public. And if we cannot listen to people with whom we disagree, we're in trouble. Free speech isn't about speech that you agree with. It's expressly about speech with which you disagree. That's the point.
Right. All right, well, we did hear from a lot of Republicans and former Republicans who called in to tell us how they would change the party. Listen to this one.
This is Tony from Greeley, Colorado. What should change in regards to the Republican Party? Absolutely nothing, because at the end of the day, it's a head count in Congress. It's party over person. The Democrat running could be the nicest person in the world, but by and large, almost exclusively, they are going to caucus with said Democrats and pass those policies, which are the antithesis of the policies that I support. So in reality, I don't think anything should change with the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, I'm tired of MAGA being a pejorative now when it's really just an America First agenda, and I support that, and I demand that the Republicans I vote for do as well. And even if the Republican is a little bit smarmy, I'm still going to vote for him because, like I said, it's a head count at the end of the day.
All right, so probably a base voter there, but I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're on top, at least for now.
Yeah, and I think it's reflective of the fact that we have moved much more, though we don't have a parliamentary system, our voting patterns are much more parliamentary in that we are voting for the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back of the jersey. It's much less about, oh, well, I like individual congressman or individual senator, and I don't really care what party they are. It's what party are these people? Are they my party? If they are my party, I'm voting for them. If they are not my party, I'm voting against them. I mean, look, I'm 50 years old. I started covering this stuff in 99. There were at that time, Lincoln Chafee, a very liberal Republican in Rhode Island. John Breaux, a very conservative Democrat in Louisiana. Fritz Hollings, a Democrat in South Carolina. Ben Nelson, a Democrat in Nebraska. Heck, North Dakota, when I first started covering this, North Dakota had an entirely Democratic congressional delegation. Byron Dorgan and Kent Conrad in the Senate and Earl Pomeroy in the House. Now, that seems like 5,000 years ago at this point, but the reality is what we've seen is we've become more polarized, and the voting is far less about any individual and far more about, to the caller's point, about I support this party and this broadly, this set of principles, and I'm voting for that more than I'm voting for Chris Cillizza or Jeremy Hobson, right? Like, that's just how it works.
Do you think that Trump and the Republicans heading into the midterms are going to be going after just the base, or are they going to try to get the swing voters?
Well, I think the first priority has to be to turn out their base. And I would suggest there's a bunch of recent polling data that suggests the base is not super energized to vote. Part of that is very traditional, the way these things work. There's a reason that in 20 of the last 22 midterm elections, the president's party lost seats in the House. Because when you're in power, you tend to take things for granted a little bit. And when you're out of power, like Democrats are at the House, White House, and Senate level, you are more energized. So part of that is sort of built in. I also think part of it is, particularly among non-MAGA identifying Republicans, which is, we can debate, but it's probably between about a quarter and a third of the overall Republican Party. They have soured on Trump significantly. They are still generally slightly more approving of his handling of the presidency than not, but it's pretty close. And those are the people, if they just decide not to vote, I'm not even sure they vote for Democrats. My guess is they just won't vote. That's a problem. So I think Republicans have to solve their base problem first. Yes, of course, they would like to improve their numbers among independent swing voters, but that's sort of that's a luxury if they can solve their base problem.
All right, let's listen to another voicemail.
Hi, this is Missy. I'm calling from Tennessee. I actually was there in Butler, PA, saw Donald Trump get shot. I no longer am a fan because the things that I supported had to do with the economy, and I believe there's a big lust for billionaires right now, and that he was supposed to be looking out for middle America, the middle class, and jobs and job prosperity. And that seems to be something that has just been completely forgotten with other priorities. And I feel like it's billionaires and other people in power whispering in his ears and getting that agenda met, where he's forgetting about the American people that he was supposed to be standing for.
Amazing to hear somebody who was in Butler, Pennsylvania, obviously a strong Trump supporter, and now has lost faith.
Yeah, and I think that that call, if you needed a microcosm of what should worry every single Republican on the ballot in November, it's that call, which is, this is not a Democrat, this is not a swing voter. This is like, if you are going to Donald Trump rallies, you count as if you're going to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rallies, you're the base of the Democratic Party, whether you like it or not. Right. Same thing on the Republican side. Yeah, I mean, and you see this borne out. I don't want to boil down a presidential election to one number, but when people ask me, okay, what was 2024 about? It was about a lot of things, but the thing I always say is, look at the exit poll, right? So, a poll that they take after people have voted. This is like a 10,000 person sample, generally considered pretty reliable. They've been doing it for a long time. They ask which issue was most important in deciding your vote. About 32% of people who voted in 2024 said the economy was the most important in deciding their vote. Donald Trump won that group over Kamala Harris 81% to 18%. And this was an election that, while Trump won relatively easily, it was pretty close, right? And so he was elected to fix the economy and lower prices. That's it. And I think the vast majority of the public, including, as you heard, some Trump supporters, have judged that he hasn't made good on that promise.
Well, and then it makes you think that 2026 could be about basically the exact same thing, high prices. Yep. People are sick of high prices and they want them to come down. They wanted him to bring them down, and then the tariffs came because of him, and then the Iran war came and the prices went up even further than they were before.
And I would say, look, one of the things that's very consistent is, even as Donald Trump's poll numbers have slipped, and they are in the low 40s at best overall, they're lower than that when it comes to his handling of the economy, cost of living, inflation. Even as those numbers have slipped, it's not as though Democratic brand has improved. The Democratic numbers are also at or near record low levels. The reality of the situation, to your point, is Donald Trump is the president. Republicans control the White House and the Senate and the House. They were elected to bring prices down. The public has judged that they have not done so. The only other option is the Democrats, right? We don't have a viable third party for people to vote for at this point. So I think Democrats are positioned to do quite well in the midterms. And at the same time, I think that is not in any way, or should not be interpreted as, some sort of huge vote of confidence in the Democratic Party or their economic solutions.
All right, let's listen to one more voicemail before we take a break. Listen to this caller.
Hi, this is Michael Lohr. My comment is, if I were to change the Republican Party, number one, we're going to stop with the name calling and demonization of the other party and other people. Number two, we're going to become fiscal conservatives. We're going to balance the budget, and we're going to look at the long-term financial health of the nation. Number three, we're going to become less of an empire and withdraw our forces from around the world and quit meddling in international affairs.
Okay, do you see any chance, Chris Cillizza, and I'm going to jump past the midterms and to the post-Trump period of our politics, which eventually will happen. Do you see any chance post-Trump that Republicans return to what the caller is describing, which you would say is maybe the Republican Party of old?
I was going to say, he's describing the Republican Party of Mitt Romney as the presidential nominee and Paul Ryan as the vice presidential nominee, broadly speaking. Sure is the answer. Look, I've learned politics is a pendulum. The way that both parties work are pendulums. I think that you have seen the pendulum move very strongly to kind of Donald Trump's nationalism, economic populism, at some level, America first, but then also we're in the middle of a war with Iran that seems to have no end. And so that complicates that. But I do think the pendulum will move back. I always tell people this. It'll move back. It probably just won't move back in your preferred timeline, right? It's like everything else in life. Things do tend to come around. Karma does tend to work, but maybe it doesn't work immediately as you would like. And I think that I think it is unlikely that the 2028 Republican presidential primary will be a fight over Donald Trump's legacy and what it means and whether the party should move on. I think, broadly speaking, the people that you see talked about are all people who are either going to say, I'm a direct heir to Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, literally Donald Trump Jr., or I'm some new version of Trumpism. I don't think until at least 2032 you're going to see a real conversation about, is this party MAGA/Trumpism or is it something else?
Interesting, because I just do think about George W. Bush at the end of his second term. John McCain wouldn't even campaign with him. They had one event together and that was it. And it was like, get out of my way. I don't want anything to do with you. I'm a new kind of
Al Gore refusing to kind of own Bill Clinton, despite the fact that Bill Clinton was quite popular. You know, I mean, at least McCain's was somewhat understandable because George W. Bush was not popular with the general public or the Republican Party. Bill Clinton was very popular with Democrats and Al Gore wanted nothing to do with them. Again, pendulums, they swing.
We'll see what happens. Stand by. More with Chris Cillizza when we come back. Welcome back to the follow-up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by Chris Cillizza, author of the So What Substack. Let's get to one more voicemail. Chris, listen to this caller.
Hi, I'm Jim Fair calling from Chicago, Illinois. What I'm looking for from the Republican Party is an opportunity to run my business without feeling the oppression of the tax man. And I really don't care about ideology. I would really like to have a voting situation in all states where there wasn't political gerrymandering, and so that the average American's voice could be heard.
As an Illinoisan myself, that is so Chicago. That is so Illinois, so practical. It's like, you know what? I just want these things to work for me, and I don't want any of this ideology, which I actually think a lot of Americans who do not spend every day thinking about politics are actually not so partisan.
100%. I tend to think neither party is currently doing this, but I do think there's a real opening either for one of the two parties or maybe a third party, though I'm pretty skeptical, to basically run as the competence/common sense party. Like, we're going to make the trains run on time. We're going to broadly try to stay out of your way unless there's a natural disaster or something like that where you need help. But we're just going to make common sense decisions. I always thought, and he's gone away from it, but I always thought Trump's best message of any of his time in office or out of office was, and this was kind of mid 2024, I'm not a conservative. I'm just in favor of common sense. Now, we can debate Donald Trump's version of common sense, but I think that appeals to a lot of people because I think their general idea of Washington and the two parties especially is none of them are working to address the issues I care about, the way to make my life kind of a little easier or the burden of government slightly less heavy. Right. And so I do think there's room to run there. But with very few exceptions, I would say Rahm Emanuel, who's a little bit of a long shot 2028 candidate, former mayor of Chicago, he's doing some interesting things on social media policy, on education that are in the kind of competence space. But beyond that, I don't see a ton of it.
Yeah. All right. Now I get to ask you about some of the political news that's been happening. So we've had these big primaries recently. The progressive Al Sayed won in Michigan. The Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong lost in Wisconsin. The progressive Peggy Flanagan won in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Is there an overarching message here? What does this tell you about what's going on with the Democrats?
Yeah, it's hard to separate signal and noise. I mean, I do think both sides, both kind of the governing wing or establishment of the Democratic Party and the Democratic Socialist wing do what all sort of people who have a very clear interest in a debate do. They seize onto the data point that makes their point, and they kind of ignore all the other data points. Look, I think if you look at the breadth of the entire primary season, we still have a few more votes to come, but 90-ish% of states have voted.
Okay. I
would say it's hard to conclude that the Democratic Socialists of America, and I guess I add the kind of DSA aligned candidates, Abdul El Sayed being one, where he is not technically a Democratic Socialist, but wants to abolish ICE, wants Medicare for all. There's clearly a bunch of energy behind them. These sorts of folks might not have won and probably wouldn't have won against establishment candidates in the past. Look, in Michigan, just as one example, Haley Stevens was a sitting member of Congress who represented the sort of right area to represent if you want to win statewide as a Democrat in a Democratic primary, which is kind of the suburban Detroit. She had the backing of the popular Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer. She had the backing of the most powerful Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. And yeah, did she lose by as much as polls suggested she might? No, but she still lost, outspending Abdul El Sayed 9-1. that tells me that there's some real kind of native organic energy on the left. Now, I think what you're seeing, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I do think is probably going to run for president in 2020, what she's trying to do with the whole laughing off like woke one was crazy is say, yeah, we said some stuff 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm not going to really own those things anymore, but I'm going to be in kind of the economic populist outsider space. I'm not going to abolish the Senate. I'm not going to, like some of the more extreme DSA positions. Now, whether her opponents, both Democrat and Republican, let her get away with it is a different conversation, but I think that's where things are headed.
Okay. Do you think that the Democrats could win states in the Senate like Ohio, Texas, Maine, and others and take back the United States Senate?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think it's the most likely outcome. I don't think it's a coin flip. If you pressed me, to decide, I would say I think Republicans lose the House majority and keep the Senate majority. But yes, to answer your question, there are certainly enough seats in play from, North Carolina, Maine, Iowa, Alaska, Texas. There are certainly enough seats in play where it could happen. Of course, Democrats need to hold Michigan, which is one of their own seats, which is not going to be easy.
Now looks like maybe the trickiest one of all of them.
I think it is the trickiest one. I would have said, if we talked 9 months ago, I would have said John Ossoff's reelection bid in Georgia, but that looks to be on a glide path, which is pretty remarkable. The New Hampshire open seat could be competitive, but I don't think in a year like this where it's a good year nationally for Democrats. But I would say if I had to guess, Republicans hold 50 or 51 seats in the next Senate. 50, they would still control the Senate because J.D. Vance is the president of the Senate and would tie break. But I would expect Democrats to net seats. I just don't know if they can net the 4 they need because the map, look, what we talked about, Alaska, Texas, Ohio, Iowa, all of those states are states that Donald Trump won by 8 or more points in 2024. It's just not an easy map.
Right. Although the president's approval rating, the high prices, you never know what will happen.
Well, and particularly in a place like Iowa, right, where farm tariffs, diesel and gas prices are, huge issues for farmers. That could be an issue where it's not just the front of the jersey versus the back of the jersey. It might be this is uniquely bad for the people who are the swing vote in that state. We'll see. I mean, that's why elections are fun and interesting. You never know what's going to happen.
Okay, on the Republican side, we just found out that we're going to have a runoff between Darlene Graham, the sister of the late Lindsey Graham, who was appointed to fill the slot when he died, and she's going to run against Ralph Norman. What do you expect there? Is there any consequence for people outside of South Carolina depending on who wins that?
I could make a case, certainly, that if Ralph Norman wins, who's a sitting Republican member of Congress, represents the conservative kind of northern part of the state called the upstate. If he wins, could I see a scenario whereby the Democratic physician named Annie Andrews is more competitive in a really good year for Democrats nationally? Yeah. Do I think that Ralph Norman would probably still win that race? Also, yes. So I don't think there's Senate majority control implications. I would say typically when an incumbent, and Darlene Graham is the incumbent, gets 32, 33% in a primary, you think, big trouble. Now, there are extenuating circumstances. Her brother died on July 11th. The primary was on August 11th. She's an unknown outside of her name and Donald Trump's endorsement. Trump has leaned on the guy who finished third, another congressman named Russell Fry, to endorse Graham. That will help. I think it's going to be pretty close. I guess I'd probably put a thumb on the scale for Darlene Graham because Trump appears to be going all in for her. And what we've seen again through the broad bulk of the primary season is usually when Donald Trump wants a Republican to win, that person wins. And usually when he wants a Republican to lose, that person loses.
Right. Except for Mike Lindell, I guess, in Minnesota.
Right. There are definitely exceptions. Look, he endorsed Randy Feenstra, the congressman in Iowa, in the Iowa governor's race. He lost to this guy who's kind of an outsider. Like, it happens. I would just say, if I was a Republican running in a primary, I'd rather have Donald Trump's endorsement than not.
If the Democrats take the House, as you say, and if let's say they squeak it out and they take the Senate too, just barely, what are they going to do with that power? Do you have any sense?
No. I think what they shouldn't do, that I would say is probably the thing they were most likely to do, particularly in the House, is try to impeach Donald Trump again, which will not work because there just are not 66 votes in the Senate to convict Donald Trump. I mean, I on almost anything I can imagine, that would placate the base. I do think that would be a bad way to try to convince voters who don't really have much of an opinion of Democrats beyond, or know much about Democrats beyond, they're just the anti-Trump party, that there's more to them. I would guess they would try to limit ICE's power and influence. That's obviously been a major increase in the first 2 years of Donald Trump's second term. I would think they would be smart to come up with not just things that limit what Trump can do, although there'll be a lot of that, but also start to pass legislation, at least in the House and Senate. Trump would veto it, but if they did control the House and Senate, that would point toward, these are the 4 or 5 positive things that Democrats believe in on a policy perspective, and here's what they're going to do to tackle big issues. Now, whether they do that or not, I mean, who knows?
Do you think that there's going to be any political interference by the Trump administration in the election?
So, at one level, I think it's challenging for them to do that because elections are run by the states. And I always remind people of this. Elections are not a federal thing. Now, yes, I know there are people say, well, he could just declare his emergency powers and seize control of the election. I mean, I can't say, no, that could never happen. I do think that is extremely unlikely to happen. And I'll tell you why. Donald Trump cares first and foremost, and second and foremost, and third and foremost about Donald Trump. And guess who's not on the ballot in 2026? Right. Donald Trump. Now, he isn't, sort of broadly, if Republicans lose, he'll take some of the blame for it. But I can't imagine him doing those sorts of things without his name on the ballot. He is very focused on his own legacy and legacy building. Do I think he will insist if the election goes against Republicans that it was rigged and stolen? 100%. He does that even when he wins elections. I would point at 2016 as an example of that. But I don't think he's going to take some of these more extreme measures that I know many on the left are worried about. I mean, look, we will continue to monitor what he is saying and doing and stay on top of it. But for right now, I think that's unlikely.
Okay. All right, everybody. I mean, you've made a few already because I've just asked you some things about things that are happening in the future. But everybody gets to make a prediction on the follow-up. So what is yours?
So I guess Florida is voting in their primary, and the primary won't be super competitive for governor, I don't think, either way. But what I will say is I do think the Florida governor's race, which is very likely to feature Byron Donalds, Republican member of Congress, against former Republican member of Congress, who is now a Democrat, David Jolly, right, in the general election. I think that could be an under 5-point race. I still think Byron Donalds will likely be the next governor of Florida, but there's a lot there. 8 years of Ron DeSantis. I think people overestimate how Republican Florida is now. That's the one I'm kind of like an outside race that people aren't talking about. And it's such a big, important state, but both for 26 and 28 that I'm kind of, I put a pin in that.
I was in Florida. I was living in Florida for part of the pandemic, and I can say that people did love how Ron DeSantis kept the kids in school and kept things open. But I'm not sure how much that extends to other Republicans in Florida. I think it is a Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis did a great job with COVID.
And particularly on COVID, which I will remind people, thankfully, is now 6 years in the rearview mirror.
Right. But I don't think Byron Donalds gets credit for that.
Look, Byron Donalds is just a guy with a bunch of money who Donald Trump endorsed. Right. He's going to win the primary. The question is, in a general election, I just don't think it's a 20-point state, right? Yeah. I don't even think it's a 15-point state. I think you'd rather be the Republican than the Democrat statewide, no question right now. But it's going to be a good year nationally for Democrats, and I think that will be true in Florida, too.
That is journalist and political commentator Chris Cillizza, author of the So What Substack. Chris, great to talk to you. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced by Harrison Patino. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I will talk to you soon.